So what is the update right now? So we're going to start with JavaFX and the web or the cloud. So JavaFX is very powerful on its own, but what we've looked at so far is locally, everything on your computer, everything running locally, no need of the internet. But we're going to change that. So we're going to look at JavaFX, how it deals with web information or web infrastructure. For example, in your applications that you may develop or the projects that you guys may have worked on, you may need to connect to certain web infrastructure, the cloud for your database, or certain information from an API that you want to fetch into your application. So we're going to look at this in two different ways. First, how you can incorporate a web view that allows you to bring web information. You can even incorporate an entire web application through JavaFX through a web view. But we're also going to look at how you can then import raw data and then process that with JavaFX. That will certainly have some sort of performance benefits, but sometimes you can also use a web view if you've already created that web application and it's already available and you want to make it accessible to your JavaFX or local machine users. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so let's look at the two approaches, and coincidentally, let's also talk about the two small projects that we're going to look at that will sort of encapsulate how JavaFX works with the web or the cloud or web infrastructure, whatever it is called. So basically, we have the number one, the first way is that you incorporate the entire website into JavaFX application. So let's say you have a desktop application and then you want to import some sort of functionality or some sort of view from a website or a web platform that is designed in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. And then you want to import that into your JavaFX desktop application. The way you can do that is that you use something called a web view. And a web view is actually a node that is part of the JavaFX library that we'll look at that allows you to display a sort of website into, and coincidentally, you can also use that to actually design a sort of browser in JavaFX. And that's actually the first project that we're going to look at. It's kind of a simple web browser that allows us to navigate to any type of website. So Google, YouTube, and you can watch YouTube videos with volume and everything else. The second way that we're going to look at is to use raw data. Instead of showing a website, can we get data from a web server or a website that we can then incorporate into our JavaFX application? And we're going to look at that as well. So there is advantages and disadvantages to both. So the advantage to the first one, using a web view to show an entire website. The advantage is that if you already have a website designed, you don't need to repeat yourself. You can just show that website to your users and they can interact with it just as they were using a regular web browser. So they'll be able to access all the functionality that your website offers from their desktop application. The disadvantage is that sometimes that can sort of complicate the design process as a whole. Sometimes you don't need to show the entire thing, you just need to fetch that information, right? And of course, that ties into then the advantages and the disadvantages of the second option. The second option, you're looking at importing that data. So you get raw data that may simplify things. It may also make your application a little bit faster and snappier. So the disadvantage is that in case, again, you have a complex website that you want to show, you'll have to use WebView. So it's not that you only pick one or the other. You can use both at the same time in one application. It's just that it's two different ways of incorporating the cloud into JavaFX. So for the second project, we're going to look at a widget. We'll design a simple weather widget that will get JSON data. JSON is a sort of type data format. We'll get that data from an API in the cloud that will give us weather data depending on a specific location that we specify. And then we'll use that data to display and design this simple widget. That kind of shows how you can work with raw data imported from the web that you can then use in your JavaFX application as opposed to displaying an entire website. All right. So with that being said, let's get into it. All right. Hello, guys. So welcome back. Today we're gonna just start with the first project, which is a simple JavaFX web browser to kind of showcase how you can incorporate WebView in your JavaFX application. And you'll use, once again, you use WebView to render web pages and web applications in your JavaFX application. So I will start by creating a new project. It's gonna be a JavaFX project, but I'm gonna name it. So I'm gonna name it browser. I think browser FX works. Okay, so I'm gonna name it browser FX, and we can see that the group ID is correct. Everything looks to be set. We're using Maven once again. This should be quite familiar because we've done this multiple times. It's just to create a simple JavaFX application in your IntelliJ IDEA or any other IDE that you may be using, like Eclipse, for example. I've noticed that some of you, the screenshot, some of the code screenshots that you sent me were done in Eclipse. So that also works perfectly. At the end of the day, it's just a JavaFX application. So let's first wait for it to initialize. That should be all. And then we're gonna look at our project structure once again. This should be quite familiar. So without further ado, I'm just gonna delete these starter files because we're not gonna use them like so. So I'm gonna just say delete anyway. And we're gonna go into the palm.xml and kind of set up our application correctly. So first of all, I'm just gonna remove these test dependencies, these JUnit Jupyter. I'm just gonna remove them because we're not gonna do any unit testing. So kind of debloat our application basically. It always helps to remove things that you're not gonna need. I wanna add this to the dictionary so it doesn't highlight like that. Okay, that's a neat trick. And this also needs to be changed. But before we do that, there is a few things that I want to change. It's a new dependency that we're gonna add called JavaFX Web. Very important dependency that allows us to use WebView. Okay, even though WebView is a kind of control, it's not incorporated in the JavaFX controls standard. It comes within its own package called JavaFX Web. And from here, let's see, I would also want to add another dependency called JavaFX Media. This is optional if you want to, but it's always good to add this as well. And in the home directory, I'm just gonna create a new class. I'm gonna call this main, and I'm gonna point our project to main as being the main file. At this point, I think that Maven should be done, so I'm just going to reload the changes, and we can see the changes are already loaded. And then I'm going to go into the module Java, and then I'm going to requires javafx.web. Okay, that works. And then I'm going to say requires javafx.media. Once again, this last one is optional. If you want to add it or not, the point of the application will still work. But sometimes it's important to add these JavaFX based dependencies so that it doesn't run into an issue, especially if in the future JavaFX gets updated. You may find that these the dependency structure changes, right? Maybe JavaFX Web starts to depend on media and things like that. So I always try to add media as well anytime that I'm working on a full JavaFX application, because I always find myself incorporating some media in there. So here I'm just going to create a controller class as well. call that we're using MVC. And in the fxml, I'm just going to create an fxml that I'm going to call main as well. So let's see, do we have everything set? Yes, so we should work in the main.fxml for now. The first thing that I'm going to do is change Control Z. The first thing I'm going to do is point to the actual controller, not the main class, and then I'm going to remove the main sort of root. It should be a border pane, not an anchor pane, and the dimensions can stay the same for now. I'm going to go into the main, and then we once again, like we've done before, I'm going to extend application and type start. That should give us the starting, and I'm also going to add main. This is also optional. JavaFX application will work even if you don't include the main, but it's always important to include it because at the end of the day, it is a Java application and you want to include the main, especially when you're doing packaging. You want the main method to be there because Maven packaging will sometimes look for the main, or rather most of the time that I've used it, it will look for the main method as well in the main class, because main method is the starting point of your Java application. Even though it's JavaFX, at the end of the day, it is still Java. And then in here, what I'm going to do is I'll say pane, which is sort of the parent layout for everything, and it kind of most all layouts in JavaFX extend from pane. So it's always good to use pane in case in the future maybe you change from border pane to an anchor pane because you figure that's what works best. You don't want to come here and change it. So I usually just call it pane. And then we're going to do an fxml loader, and then we're going to do load. In here, I'm going to say objects dot require non-null. What this allows us to do is that the parameter that is passed into the load method, we make sure that it is not a null value. That would be bad if we try to load a null value. So we try to make sure that we account for that as well. And then I'm going to say get class, get resource. This should also be quite familiar. So main.fxml, and then I'm going to create a scene. In this scene, I'm just going to say, and I'm going to point it to the root. I'm not going to add any dimensions for height or width because that is already added, not in the pom.xml, in the main.fxml right here. So we have 400 for height, 600 for width. That's good for a starter project. And then I'm going to say stage dot set title. The first title that I'm going to do is call it a browser FX, but this would ideally change to a website that you're visiting. So maybe in the future we'll just change this, make sure that it's a little bit more dynamic and it is not static. And then we're going to do stage dot set scene to the scene that we want, and then it'll be stage dot show. I think that should be all, and then we collapse it like so. Yeah, that should be all. And then in the main.fxml, we want to change a few things. So in the border pane at the top, what I want to show, once again, this is not really a fully fledged web browser. That would take us a long time. Its point is to show how to use WebView and incorporate WebView and the power that WebView provides, which is to render web pages and web applications into JavaFX. So we're going to use a very simple application and a very simple layout. At the top, I'm just going to have a menu bar. And let's see. So what do we include? What should we include in the menu bar? So I'm just gonna, I think it will be best to just include a few menus. So I would say menu 1. I'm gonna give it a text of navigate, on this menu, we'll have a list of simple, basically simple websites that we set. Those websites should be the points where we navigate to kind of show how WebView works. So we'll say navigate, and inside navigate, I'm just gonna have a few menu items. The first one, I'm just gonna call it home, and I'll give it an on action. This on action will be nav home, navigate home, and it will be a self-closing tag. It will show an error here because we haven't created that in the controller, because we pointed it to a controller. IntelliJ is smart enough to already notice that there's nothing in the controller, so it kind of points you to that. But for now, we can ignore that error. And menu item, next we'll do, let's see, maybe let's do something like Instagram, and I'll say hashtag Instagram, and that should be all for the navigation. We don't want to add a lot of things. And then menu, I'm gonna say text, history, and say fxid, and I'm gonna call this history. We also want, basically, we want to be able to navigate and look at the history of the web pages that we have visited. That is also one of the power of using WebView and kind of the web capabilities of JavaFX. So in the center, what I will do is where we will add our WebView, and I'll give it an fxid of WebView. That should be self-closing tag as well. And then at the bottom, just to kind of spice our application a little bit, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna add a progress bar, and that should be an fxid of progress bar, like so. And it also should be a closing tag. And then I'm gonna create the first field, which is a web view, and then I'm gonna follow this with history, and I'm gonna follow this with the progress bar, and then we're gonna do navigate home. Yes, and this should be Instagram as well. The first thing that I want to do is I'm going to remove these event objects, because we're really not going to worry about what the events are. We know what they are. It's click. In this case, for simplicity's sake, we're not going to worry about this. For now, let's see. So we're not going to jump into, I also want to remove these unused imports to kind of optimize our application a little bit. So we're not going to jump into the controller right away. For now, let's run it and see whether we have an application that runs in the first place. So the thing that I want to do is that you notice that when I go to the main.java, I'm able to run it because IntelliJ notices that there is a main and start method. But when I change to a different file, I'm not able to run it. This is kind of annoying. If you've worked in JavaFX for quite some time, you have, because we did quite a large application when we did the banking application, kind of banking demo. So what you always want to do is that you come here to edit configuration, and you want a run configuration. So the run configuration should point to org, the Java master class, to the main class, and I'm gonna call this main, basically. And as soon as we point to that, IntelliJ should be smart enough to notice that even though we are in the pom.xml or module-info.java, we're still able to see this run method highlighted. As a matter of fact, let's run it from here and see what we get. We should get a simple window, and At least we haven't done any errors. Okay, cool. So we can see the progress bar is just flashing. This is how it looks in default mode. Navigate, we have home, home and Instagram. On the history, there's nothing because we haven't populated the history, but we'll do that later on. And we can see that our application works. We can enlarge it, we can diminish it. Yeah, so it works for now. In the next video, we'll basically work a little bit in the controller to kind of get the functionality that we want, and work with WebView and as well as the web engine that is provided by WebView. So see you in the next video. Hello everyone. So I just noticed that I keep talking about WebView and web engine, but I haven't really talked about what they are actually. I haven't explained in a little bit more detail and kind of contrast the two. So let's do that right now. So we'll start with WebView. WebView is like a special container in JavaFX. It is also a control, type of control, but you can think of it as a special container that allows you to display web content, like web pages, videos, and everything else that comes with web content. So in that sense, it's kind of a web browser that you can build inside your JavaFX application. It is built on a web platform called WebKit, and that platform is actually quite powerful. It is also coincidentally the platform on top of which Safari, the Mac web browser, is built on. So it's quite powerful and capable and not limited in any way. But web engine is kind of different. So WebView itself, once it is initialized, it creates this other object inside called web engine. Web engine is the object that allows us to control what happens with WebView. So it is through web engine that we can load web pages from URLs. We can also execute JavaScript. We can handle page load events, and we can interact with the web content programmatically. So we control WebView and what happens to the rendered web pages using the web engine. And it is the WebView object that we create that gives us the reference to the actual object of web engine. So that's the kind of difference between the two. WebView displays everything, it renders everything. Web engine allows you to then modify it and interact with the rendered content programmatically. Okay, so in the next section, we'll start with the programming, and you'll kind of now understand in more detail how we can use both of those two objects to create the project that we want to create. And it's going to be a simple web browser, but it's in essence to just show us how WebView is used, and web engine is then used to control WebView. So see you in the next. All right, so let's get started with the project and kind of work with WebView to just see it render a page. So here we are in the controller class, and what I will do is that first of all, we already have a WebView, and recall that we said that it is WebView that provides us with the web engine. So I'll say web engine right here, and we're also gonna make sure that this class controller implements the initializable interface. That way we're able to initialize, so we'll say initializable like so. In here, what I'll do is that I'll say web engine. I'll create a web engine object, but we're not going to do new web engine. Recall that we said that it is WebView. Once it is initialized, internally, it creates a web engine object for us that will be used to control WebView. So what we'll do is that we'll get that object from WebView. So we simply say WebView dot get engine like so. So we already have that. And then here in the navigation, I don't know, I'm not comfortable with this Instagram thing. I don't know why. Maybe let's Let's try YouTube. I think YouTube would be more interesting. So here I'll just say YouTube like so. Let's see if the error goes away. It does. Okay, cool. So in here, the first thing I'll do, so recall that if we want to load a web page, we use the web engine to load a web page into the web view. So what I'll do, say web engine dot load, and then here I pass the URL, so http dot google.com. That should be enough. And then in here I'll try to repeat the same thing, so load http dot youtube.com. Okay, so everything looks fine. Let's run it and see if our navigation works. Because what we do have, okay, we can see, so what we do have in the main.fxml is that, let me just minimize this, is that we essentially have two menus. One is navigate, the other one is history. So right now we're working with the navigate one. So let's navigate to home and see if we get a Google web page. Okay, right there. Okay, cool. Let's try YouTube. All right, cool. YouTube also looks like it loads. Let me first, I want to play a video and see if that works. So let me reduce the volume just a little bit, like so. And what I'll then do is let's watch the thing that plagues the internet, which is cat videos. Okay, it looks like a short video right here. Let me click on that. Okay. So it works. Okay, cool. So you can navigate to YouTube. That is also doable. All right, cool. So it looks like our navigation works. Let me just close this. In the next video, we'll try and work with we'll actually work with the history menu and get that working as well. So see you in the next one. All right, so let's work on the history menu. So what we'll do is that through the web engine, we have this get history method that gives us access to a history object, and then from the history object we get access to an observable list, which is get entries. And then on this observable list, because it is observable, we can add a listener. So if we add a listener, and this listener is going to be a type a list change listener, and let's see, a list change listener, and then from here we'll call this object C, and then you can use an arrow function, and then down here we will, let's see if I'm getting this correct. Okay. And then down here, we want access. We always want to point the marker to the next entry. So we'll say C dot. Should say C dot next, I believe. Not sure why this is not working. Let's see, change. Okay, it should be list change dot change right here like so. And then in here, instead of super, I want to do extends web history.entry. And then let's see, let's change listener, that not small change, it should be large change like so. That should work. And then from here, inside here is where we're going to basically manipulate the view. But first of all, there comes instances where you visit one URL twice or more than once. You go to google.com, probably if you're using your computer for like 5 hours, you may visit Google like 10 or 20 times. So we don't want to enter that same URL 20 times, right? We instead want to always enter it at the latest when the last time you visited it. So if you visit Google homepage and then just close your browser, that will be your latest entry. But we want to remove duplicates. So in order to remove duplicates, we need to first of all iterate on the entries. So I'll say for web history dot entry, and each individual entry using a for each group, and then I'll say c dot get added sublist from this change object. And then once we have access to that list, inside here we'll do something quite interesting. So we'll say history dot get items, and then we'll say remove if. Remove if, we pass it an arrow function on each individual item, and then from this individual item we'll say it will be removed. So we'll say item remove it dot, first of all we get an ID, and then we check the ID, which is pretty much the title of the entry, dot equals to entry dot get URL, because each entry has that property. So from here, each item is a menu item. As you can see, the IntelliJ quite handy highlights that for us, and every menu item has this property called an ID. And we usually, it's not always, but we usually want to make sure that the item itself, whatever the title of the item, is also the same as the ID. So when we get the ID, we're getting whatever that menu item's title or name or value actually is. Okay, and then from here, when we pass it this arrow function, basically it will be parsed into the remove if, and then it will check. If this evaluates to true, that item will be removed. Okay, so basically, here's what happens. Since we are iterating over every entry is also a menu item. We're passing it an arrow function. What this arrow function equates to, basically it will say, it will evaluate this dot equals to either true or false, and then it will return that value to this function. This function also has a reference to the current object that it is referring. If the value that is returned is true, it will remove it. If it is false, it will keep it there. Okay, so this syntax may seem a bit weird. It's not. It's kind of it's a more modern syntax that kind of hides a lot of details away from students, but basically it's quite easy to understand. The evaluation of this, true, remove if, removes it. If it's false, it keeps it there. Okay, so that's what this arrow function does. It just evaluates to true, it will return the reference to that that object. If it doesn't, then the object will not be removed because there's no reference that is returned to the remove if function. And down here, now I want to enter every entry. So I'll say web history dot entry once again. It's quite similar to what we did up there. So dot get added sublist. And here, in here, I'll say final And then I want to create a menu item for each entry. So I'll say menu item, and this menu item will have an entry. Sorry about that. Entry dot get URL, not dot get title, dot get URL. So that returns the actual URL, not just the title, because the title of the page, it may just say Google, but maybe you travel to google.com/ whatever other value that comes after that. So the URL will be different even though the title may be similar. And here I'll say menu item dot set. We want to set the ID to the URL. Okay, so we want to make sure that those two things are the same. That way it will be the URL that is displayed on every menu item entry. Quite easy to understand on that one. So menu item also, I want to set an on action. This is to allow us to visit that page when we click on it. You see a history entry of your navigation. In most browsers, or in any quite useful browser, you can click on that entry and then navigate to that URL right away. You don't have to manually enter that into a search field. So what we'll do here is that for each entry, I'll just call it A. Once again, we're passing it an R function. And then web engine, and then we'll say load. And then we pass it the entry dot get URL. Right here, we can also do menu dot get ID, quite similar to this, but since we are already iterating over each and every entry, we can just say get URL when we get to that particular entry. So, and then we'll do history dot get items dot add to actually add that menu item. Otherwise, we won't be able to see it. All right, cool. This looks about right. So let's run it and see if you have everything set up correctly. Let's see. Okay, cool. So we can navigate to home. Let's see if that works. Okay, cool. And we can navigate to YouTube as well. Let's see. Sometimes it takes quite a little bit of time because it also show a number of warnings here. Just ignore these. It's usually about media stuff, but it still works, so we don't need to worry about that. And also, so you notice that if we go here on history and we click, we can see our two entries listed here. We have Google and then we have YouTube. So if I click on Google, we should be able to navigate to google.com from the history entries here. So, okay, cool. And then I can go to YouTube as well. And notice that they will replace each other. The latest is always at the bottom because it is added last. From right here in the code, we can see we are iterating it off over the entries, and we added at the bottom. So I hope that makes sense. So to kind of summarize a little bit, we have web engine. Once again, every time we're dealing with WebView, we control it through the web engine. And then through the from the web engine, we're getting access to a history object. That history object contains an observable list that is get entries. And we acquire it from the get entries method. But that observable list is our entries. And then we add a listener because it's an observable list. We can observe it. We can make sure that when something changes in that list, that means the user navigates to a new URL, then we'd be able to do some interesting stuff. We'll be able to update the list of our history and maybe even remove duplicates as well. And then we pass it another function, so anonymous function, and then that is a of list list change listener dot change, and it's a generic. And this is basically to this expression right here allows us to be a bit safe. It's a way of Java not letting the programmer themselves have to specify exactly what the object is. Right? We're trying to generalize as long as it extends from this particular entry type. And then we call it C, and we move immediately. The first thing we do is that we move to the next entry. Right? We point the because it's a list, so it starts from the top. We're pointing to the next entry, and then that allows us to be able to navigate it quite easily. So and then here we iterate over the entries, and we check if there are duplicates, remove them, and then we finally list the whole list. So we render it on the page. Let's see, is there anything that I may have gotten? Let's see. Okay, so IntelliJ is suggesting that you can when this reference is not used, you can replace it to an underscore like this. That way IntelliJ notices that, okay, you don't intend to use it and you've been explicit about it, but it is required for the syntax to actually work. You can't just, I don't think you can remove it like so. It would just throw an error. So you just add it back, but you won't be able to use it. So yeah, so that's it for the web history. I'm just kind of showing that, you know, when you're using WebView, you have access to your navigation history and you can do some interesting stuff on it because it's an observable list. So you can add listeners and other events to kind of manipulate that to how you want your browser or your web view to work. So in the next section, we'll add a little bit on this, and then we'll move on to the next project. We will not try to delay on this. We may do a few things about when we load. Another thing that I want to do when we load a page, I want to make sure that I indicate to the user whether the loading has been successful or has failed, because they won't know. The way this application works is that once you run it and then you click maybe on going to home, which is Google, if that fails, it just leaves a blank page and you don't know. You may think, oh, maybe it's something wrong with my internet, but that's not actually the case. It may have just failed because the URL does not point to anything. So we want to make sure that we handle that as well. And then we'll do the progress bar as well. We'll add the progress bar. And after that, we'll be able to move on to other interesting stuff. So see you in the next one. Okay, so now let's do the progress bar as well as the loading of the page to check the kind of status of the outcome whenever we try to load a page. So I'll do Web Engine. Once again, it's through the Web Engine. The Web Engine gives us something called a load worker. So when we do get load worker, and then from the worker, the load worker, which is this is the one that does the loading. It's kind of a separate process. Recall that we did workers in concurrency in JavaFX. This is what happens. JavaFX will not use the main thread to load a page, to do the work to load a page, because that would freeze up your application. What it will do is that it will create a separate worker, a separate instance, where it will then use to load that page. We get access to that. That worker, since it uses a worker interface, it has access to something called the state property. And then this state property, we add a listener to it because it is observable. And in here, what we'll do, pass it this object. So we'll have an old value as well as a new value. And this should give us the ability to then manipulate it however you want. So there are instances. So we can say the first condition is that if new value is equal to succeeded, this is a state. We can see that it's in JavaFX.concurrent.worker. This is an enum. called state.succeeded. This would allow us to check if it has indeed succeeded. If it has, what we just want is to just print a new line, call it success, and I'll do an else if, and it will be new val, not new, just new val, new value equals to failed. If it has failed, well, we'll just print failed, like so. This is quite easy. Okay, I'm just like, printing to the console, but this is just for learning processes. But what you would actually do in a normal application is that you would maybe try to create a new kind of maybe a new window or a message window that tells the user that it has failed, not a console. But this, for development purposes, this is more than enough. And then let's see. Okay, so let's first do the progress bar, and then we'll run everything all at once and kind of be efficient, a little bit efficient on this. So we do have access to this progress bar control. So we'll say progress bar. It has a progress property. So the progress property, and then we're going to bind it to a web engine progress property, which is, recall that workers also have progress. They track their progress. Because of that, it's quite a one-to-one tracking, and the tracking is usually, I think it's from 0 to 1. So it goes 0.100, and then if you multiply that by maybe, I don't know, 100, you will be able to get a proper percentage. So let's see, web engine dot get load worker, and then we'll say progress property. Okay, we're able to bind that, and then we'll say progress dot visible property and bind it. We also don't want it to appear when it's not loading a page, because whenever we load it, it appears and then it just flaking like that because it is not being used. It's just there for appearance purposes, but we want to remove that and make sure it only appears when we actually do load a page. So we'll say we'll bind it to, once again, the get load worker dot this time we'll say state property is equal to running, I think. Let's see. What is it? It's JavaFX concurrent. That's the one. Sometimes it gets tricky because there's a lot of running. Constants that exist in Java. So if you're not careful, you may load a different one. So let's see. Another thing that I think I could do is, so in here, I also want to show you what it's like to load a local page. We're loading things from the internet. Let's load the local page for the first time. So I'll create a new HTML file, and I'll name this main. Why not? So main.html, and this will be browser. Is it BrowserFX? Oh, it's quite at the top right there. Why was I struggling with that? Anyway, so and then here what I'll do is that I'll create an h1. This is a heading of 1 value. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with HTML, but it's quite simple. I'm just going to create a title that I will name, I'll say, welcome to JavaFX web, like so. So it should show a page with this title. And then down here I will, let's see, how do I do this? So the first thing that I'll do is I'll say URL of URL object. Don't want to call it URL1, just URL. And then I'll do this dot get class dot get resource. Okay, we get access to the main .html, like so. And let's see, what kind of error is it throwing? Is already defined in the scope. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. So it's interfering with that. Let's put a 1 there. And then I'll do assert. I also want to assert to make sure that URL1 is not equal to null. And then we can load it. So web engine dot load. This time you use a different kind of method. I think, is it? No. No. So this content, load content, you can pass it. If you do this in here, you can literally pass it an HTML like that, and then it will load that. But since we've created a local HTML file, we can still use the load, but we'll do URL1 dot when we use this method to external form, so that it formats it correctly, and that should suffice. So excuse me. So let's run it and test out each and every one of those things. So we'll start with the load worker to kind of look at its state and make sure that a user sees, okay, there you go. It says success because we're loading the local page immediately. So we don't have to navigate to any point. This is being done automatically. That's good. So let's try and navigate to the home, and then watch closely here. The progress bar should appear, and then it should show the progress. Let's see. Okay, so we can see loads. We can go to YouTube as well, and then that loads as well, and we still have access to our history. But notice that the local page has also been added. Once again, don't worry about the warnings, but you can see that it has been added. We can see that we have success. It has loaded successfully, and then we can go back to the local page as well, and then it says success again. Now, what would happen if we have, let's see, a failed state? So a failed state may be, maybe let's say we type this wrongly, and we say main with double N. That will mean that our file does not exist. From the moment we run it, we can see that it throws this error, but it should say something else. Okay, maybe it's okay. This error is thrown from here, not the loading of the HTML. My bad. We could do it from here instead. Instead of saying Google, we could add other gibberish right here, and then this should work. We should be able to see a failed state launched by JavaFX. So we see success. If we go to home, we see failed. And notice that the progress bar just flashes a little bit. See, if it does no progress. Okay, so we can see that it's also not added into the navigation history because it has failed. That's very good. So with this, we'll close out the whole WebView thing. So in conclusion, WebView is quite easy to use. It's just that it has a lot of usage, a lot of power, in the future we may add a little bit more things, maybe try and work with JavaScript as well. But in essence, what the web view is mostly used for is to just bring in web content that exists on the web into a JavaFX application. Why would you want to do that? Let's say you have a desktop application that you've developed in JavaFX, and then you want that desktop application to be able to use online login forms. Maybe your users usually log through the website, so you might want to bring in that login page into your JavaFX application, and then users will be able to log in right away without having to leave the desktop application. And then maybe you'll use other like networking tricks to bring in to kind of communicate between the desktop application as well as the web server. My bad. As well as the web server. So with that, we'll bring this to a close. In the next section, we'll start up with a more interesting project that deals with JavaFX and the web, but this time instead of using WebView, we are bringing in data from a web server, from a web API, but we bring in that data as a raw format. It does not come in the form of a web page. Instead, we use a format called JSON, which is quite popular. And once we bring it in as JSON, we'll be able to then work with that data to render whatever views that we want. So that will encapsulate how you can use the web in JavaFX. Either WebView, which is more similar to a web browser. In fact, it is a web browser. And then you can use raw data, which is you communicate with a public or an API in the cloud that then sends you raw data. That data can either come in form of JSON or XML or other formats if you want to create your own formats, and then that data you'll be able to render it however you want. Your users may not even notice that data comes from a public API, unless they have something like maybe if their internet gets cut off, that is something that they would notice. But okay, not much talking. Let's get to it. See you in the next one.